And we really try to emphasize that when we talk to people. I don't think the Black people who went, to Cleveland and Chicago and Detroit and Los Angeles and Oakland went there as immigrants. They went there as refugees and exiles from terror. Mm-hmm. And what happened when they got to those places is that they were placed effectively in refugee camps where they weren't allowed to be full citizens of Chicago and Detroit. They were marginalized, they were exploited, they were displaced whenever there was an economic need in those places to build the next whatever. Mm-hmm. And so we see generational poverty in the South, and we see generational stress, in the North and in the Midwest. And we can't disconnect these current problems from this same story of lynching in Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana. And those lines that were created by that exodus, where people abandoned property that they owned and skills that they had cultivated over 2 or 3 generations. And I just think we haven't really understood the consequences of this violent era of terror and menace that we subjected all African Americans to, right? And that's why we emphasize that the victims weren't just the 4,000 or 5,000. We're about to actually introduce 1,600 new names of lynching victims that we're completing this next set of research that'll be from 1865 to 1877. So the numbers are going to increase to over 6,000 documented. But it's not just those people, it's also the millions who were tormented and traumatized and threatened and terrorized by that. My grandfather on my dad's side grew up on the Eastern Shore, and he was 17 working in this he was trying to become a mechanic, and he was good, and he worked in the little shop, and one day the word was getting around that somebody had done something, and he had to run, and he witnessed a lynching behind a fence, looking through a hole, and he saw all the people involved, and most of them were people who worked in this shop. And he told me that it was horrible. He said, but the worst part was having to go to that shop the next day, pretending that these people were decent human beings, pretending not to know that he had seen them torture somebody just because of his race. And when you have to live a life where you don't get to say anything about what you've seen, and you have to pretend, and people just have no idea of the complexity and the weight that creates. And that's why for us creating spaces like this has been so important.